Welcome, everybody, again. And hey, Luke 11 is where we're going to be today. We're going to pick up the story where we left off. I think I say this every week, right? We got a lot to cover. Yeah, exactly. Got a lot to cover. And we're going to go right into the story here where we left off. Time's getting short, and Jesus knows it. It's less than 6 months until the Passover, until he goes to Jerusalem to go to the cross and do what he came to do, seal all the covenants with his own death and by the power of his own blood. And as in our story here, we can see back in Luke 9:51, when the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. Jesus knows what's going on, and he knows it's time to go. And so he embarks on this kind of final procession through the land to Jerusalem, traveling through Galilee and Samaria and Judea. You can see at the beginning of Luke 10 chapter 1, and the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them out ahead of him, 2 by 2, into every town and place where he himself was about to go. Jesus is preaching and he's teaching as he goes through all the towns and the villages, his ambassadors going before him to announce his coming. We're going to pick up the story in verse 37 of chapter 11. While Jesus was speaking, as usual in this section of Luke, Luke's not super informative about the exact location of where each of these stories about Jesus occurs. It's kind of like, hey, this one time when Jesus was teaching, this happened, and this other time that Jesus was teaching, he said this. Pretty much how these chapters of Luke go. Not a lot of info about where all of this happens, just that it happened. And that's what's happening here. Jesus is somewhere in the land, some town somewhere, teaching and preaching to the crowds. Verse 37, while Jesus was speaking, a Pharisee asked him to dine with him. Now, just so you know, this is not an invitation making sure that Jesus has some nice lunch. Okay, it's in the Jewish culture of that day, an invitation like this carried much more significance than we would realize in our day. We don't kind of roll like this, but they do. An invitation to dine with a Pharisee was not really about making sure Jesus had enough to eat. Meals like this one that Jesus is invited to, they're not usually private events like we think of them today. We've covered this sometimes before. The last time he went to a Pharisee's house, actually. These meals were often like semi-public gatherings, especially among the powerful, among the leadership class. It's not really about the food. It's about the discussion that's going to happen around the meal. It's very common for meals to be held in open courtyards or like large rooms where other people could stand around and listen. Disciples and students and even like curious onlookers would gather around, enter to hear the conversation going on. Religious discussion and debate were a normal part of these meals. Teachers would teach, answer questions, and sometimes engage in theological debates while people stood around listening. That's what's going on here. While Jesus was speaking, a Pharisee asked him to dine with him. Is Jesus going to accept the invitation? Oh, yeah, for sure. So he went in and reclined at the table. This is the second of 3 times that we read in the Gospels of Jesus going to dine at a Pharisee's house, like I said. All 3 stories found only in Luke. This is the second one. So yes, Jesus accepts the invitation. Luke tells us that he went in and reclined at the table. This might sound a bit strange to us today, but in first century Judea and really the Greco-Roman world, people didn't sit on chairs at a high table like we do much. That might be for like quick meals or like just eating with your family. But in situations like this, everybody reclined on low cushions or couches. Reclining at a meal was the normal, accepted way of eating during formal and social occasions of this caliber. It was a posture of relaxation, fellowship. That's what the idea is. The evening or midday meal was often a time for extended conversation with a community and for teaching and for discussion. Anyway, people would lie on their side. That's why he says reclined. They'd prop up on their left elbow usually with their head at the table, their feet stretched out behind them, and they'd eat with their right hand. The tables were low. The couches kind of arranged in a U shape usually around the table, so everybody can like look at each other while they're eating and talking. So when Jesus reclined at the table, he wasn't just eating, he's entering into the social and relational setting of the meal. He's not just there to get a snack, he's there for the talk. He's making himself available for the conversation and the interaction with this Pharisee that's invited him into his house. So how's it going to go, do you think? Well, we'll see. It goes like the other ones go usually. Verse 38, the Pharisee was astonished to see that he did not first wash before dinner. So Jesus goes in the house, skips the ceremonial washing station, goes right to the table is the idea. The Pharisee was astonished. How's this going to go? It's about as well as you expect. It's going to go fine for Jesus. The Pharisee, though, we'll see, because even before it starts, there's an issue. Because apparently, when Jesus arrives, like I said, he skips the washing station, goes right to the table, and he skipped a very important step in doing this, in the Pharisee's eyes at least. Luke says the Pharisee is astonished at this lack of washing by Jesus. That word astonished can be a reaction to something positive or negative. Which is it in the Pharisee's mind, do you think? Yeah, negative. It's kind of like, I can't believe Jesus came into my house, a Pharisee's house, and did not wash his hands. He's offended by this idea. Maybe when I went to my grandma's lunch table without washing my hands is kind of the idea. Get over there and get your hand. Why is this such a big deal? It's not because Jesus came in with dirt all over his hands like my kids used to. And you're like, hey, go and get cleaned up before you come to the table. That's not what's going on here. This wasn't about basic hygiene. This was about ceremonial hand washing, a strict religious ritual that the Pharisees had developed and elevated to great importance in their lives. The Pharisees followed what was called the tradition of the elders. It's a codified set of rules. Large body of man-made religious rules that had been added to the Mosaic law over time. According to the traditions of the elders, which Pharisees followed very carefully, a person could become spiritually unclean by touching something or someone considered unclean as they were out and about during the day. And so because of this, the Pharisees believed it was necessary to ceremonially wash their hands in a very specific way before every meal, not to get rid of the dirt, but to remove the spiritual defilement that may have come upon their hands or the food. This hand washing was not a quick rinse, right? It involved pouring water over the hands in a very particular manner, often up to the wrist. It was a detailed ritual that had become deeply ingrained in their religious practices. Anyway, to this Pharisee, failing to perform this ritual before eating was not just a minor oversight. It's a serious religious offense. So when Jesus sat down to the table without washing his hands first, the Pharisee couldn't believe what he was seeing. That's the idea. In his eyes, Jesus had just committed a major breach of religious tradition. In their minds, eating with unwashed hands made the food unclean, and therefore made the person who ate the unfood unclean as well, or defiled. So did the Pharisee say something? Did he express his offense and his disbelief? Does he speak up and say, I can't believe you didn't do the washing ceremony thing, Jesus? We don't know. Somehow, Jesus knows this is the problem. He knows that this Pharisee is offended and why. So Jesus is going to explain. He's going to address the subject of defilement and uncleanness, a subject that he has addressed several times already to these guys. Verse 39, and the Lord said to him, Now you Pharisees, you clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside you're full of greed and wickedness. I got to say it better than that. You Pharisees, you clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside you're full of greed and wickedness. That's the idea, the tone. Jesus looks at the Pharisee and says with clear exasperation, kind of like, you Pharisees, man. You cleanse the outside of the cup. He's using simple, everyday picture that everyone would have understood, right? Picture a beautiful cup sitting on the table. It's been carefully washed, carefully polished. The outside shines, looks impressive, looks clean, looks pure. Jesus is like, that's all you Pharisees think about. What you look like on the outside. They were obsessed with the cup, the container, how it looked to others. They wanted their religion to be shiny and impressive. They wanted people to see how spiritual they were, how they followed every tradition. And on the outside, they looked super clean, very religious, very impressive. But Jesus says, you clean the outside of the cup, and then he leaves the sentence hanging for a moment there. dropping the hammer, but inside you're full of greed and wickedness. Whew. See, the problem wasn't the polish on the outside of the cup. The problem is what's inside the cup. The Pharisees were so concerned with how the cup looked that they completely ignored what was in the cup. They cared more about outward appearance than inward reality. That's what Jesus is saying. The polish of the cup is not the issue. What's on the inside of the cup is the issue. Because Jesus tells them, inside, you're full of greed and wickedness. That's the problem. They had become experts in cleaning the outside while completely neglecting the inside. Their hearts were full of greed, pride, selfishness, moral corruption, but as long as the outside looked good, they're satisfied. Is this not the heart of empty religion? It's possible to look very spiritual on the outside while being far from God on the inside, is it not? It's possible to have a shiny religious life while your heart contains greed and wickedness. And that's exactly what Jesus was confronting in the Pharisees again. He's already told them this. This is not a new problem. Isaiah wrote 700 years before this, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men." Jesus has already quoted that verse to the Pharisees before. And here he's telling the Pharisees again, but this time he's got more to say. Verse 40, "You fools." Jesus isn't just calling them names here. He's making a serious spiritual accusation. When he says, "you fools," you might remember, he's using the same kind of language that he used in the parable of the two builders at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. You might remember that, Matthew 7. Do you remember that story? Jesus describes two men who both heard his words. And one man was wise. He heard the words of Jesus and obeyed them and built his house on the rock. And the other man was foolish. He heard the words of Jesus, but he didn't obey them. And so Jesus says that man built his house on the sand. And when he calls the Pharisees fools here in Luke 11:40, he's saying something similar. You've heard the truth. You've heard my words. I've told you all of this before, but you're refusing again today to listen and obey. You're building your lives on the sand. You're fools. The Pharisees had heard Jesus teach again and again. They'd seen his miracles. They'd witnessed his power. But instead of believing and repenting, what do? They just continue in their hypocrisy. They're more concerned with outward appearance than the condition of their hearts. So Jesus looks at them in kind of like a holy frustration type of way and says, "You fools, don't you understand that God made both the outside and the inside? Why are you so obsessed with cleaning the outside while your hearts are full of greed and wickedness?" See, they had heard the truth and they were refusing to obey it. That, according to Jesus, of course, is the height of foolishness. Verse 40, "You fools, did not he who made the outside make the inside also?" Reality is, God made it all. He made all of us. I mean, all of us and all of us, the inside and the outside. God gave every human being both a physical existence and a spiritual existence, correct? Yeah, Jesus is like, you Pharisees are so concerned with the physical defilement, but what about spiritual defilement? You don't seem to care about that at all. You fools, did not he who made the outside make the inside also? He created our bodies, and he also created our hearts. The very core of who we are. Both are important. Both are designed by God. Both are essential. But the Pharisees have become completely one-sided. They're obsessed with the physical and the outward, washing their hands, cleaning their cups and dishes, keeping every religious tradition, and maintaining a good public image. They wanted everything to look clean and impressive on the outside. Yet they completely neglected the inside, the condition of their hearts. Their hearts were full of greed and pride and selfishness and corruption. That's what Jesus is saying. And Jesus is essentially asking, why are you so focused only on the physical while completely ignoring the spiritual? God made both. Why are you only concerned with what people can see? That's why he calls them fools. They had heard the truth many times, yet they were still refusing to truly listen and obey. They were building their lives on the sand, focused on outward appearance while neglecting the matters of the heart. Verse 41, "But give as alms those things that are within, and behold, everything is clean for you." So in the previous verse, Jesus was contrasting the inner and the outer things of being human, the outward physical part of us, and the inner man, the heart. And Jesus exposed the Pharisees' problem. He told them they were so focused on cleaning the outside that they completely neglected the inside, their hearts. And now in verse 41, Jesus gives them the solution. But give as alms those things which are within. What does Jesus mean by those things which are within? Good question. Glad you asked. He's talking about the same thing again. The heart, isn't he? He's saying, stop obsessing over the outside. Instead, start dealing with what's on the inside. Your heart. Give me your inner self. Surrender your heart to God. In other words, Jesus is calling the Pharisees and us to give our hearts to God. Not just our outward religious performance, but our inner selves, our motives, our desires. He wants us to bring our hearts to him. And then Jesus makes what an amazing promise. If you do that, behold, all things are clean for you. Wow. This is the point that he's making. Jesus is saying, when you give me your heart, when you surrender your inner self to God, then true cleanness comes. Internal cleanness. You no longer have to live in fear of defilement. You no longer have to obsess over external rituals. When your heart is right with God, then all things are clean for you. Question: is the problem of defilement an outer man problem or an inner man problem? Is my biggest problem the defilement out there in the world somewhere that's going to somehow contaminate me? Well, Mark 7 says this. Jesus is Jesus talking. And he said, what comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. Did I leave anything off the list? All of these things come from within, and they defile a person. They come from within. My primary defilement problem is not external. It's internal. So is yours. And so is everyone else's. That's why only Jesus is the solution to every problem that plagues this world and plagues us. Because he's the only one who can solve the problem of the human heart. If the problem of the human heart is not solved, then none of the other problems of this world will ever be solved. But if the problem of the human heart has been solved, then the rest of the problems will disappear. External religion is empty without a surrendered and transformed heart. But when we truly give God our hearts, when we let him change us from the inside out, then we're truly clean, even if our hands aren't washed according to tradition. Pharisees are so worried about this external defilement that they miss the most important thing, the condition of their hearts. Jesus is saying, stop focusing only on the outside. Give me what is within. Give me your heart, and when you do, you'll be truly clean. And Jesus isn't done. He's going to make 3 statements of woe about the Pharisees. Do you remember what woe means? It's the Greek word oue, I think, something like that. In English, it's O-U-A-I, 4 vowels in a row. So I think it's oa or something like that. Anyway, I don't speak Greek, but I know what the word means. And the word means horror or disaster is what it means. Think of it, this is the opposite of the Beatitudes, the Beatitude language. When Jesus says, blessed are the meek, etc., in Matthew 5, he's saying, how fortunate are the meek. Oh, what a great future is in store for them. Woe is the opposite of that. Oh, how unfortunate are the Pharisees. Oh, what a great disaster is in store for the Pharisees. Woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and neglect justice and the love of God. Those you ought to have done without neglecting the others. Another clear contrast between external religion and internal reality here. That theme runs through this entire passage. The Pharisees were very careful to tithe even the smallest garden herbs. Things like mint and rue and dill. Reality is, these are cheap and they're easy to give. They didn't cost much. They were small, visible acts of religion that made the Pharisees look very devoted and very generous. But Jesus says when it comes to the weightier matters, things like justice and mercy and the love of God, they're just completely missing. You see, justice and mercy and love are much harder and more costly gifts to give. They require sacrificing your pride, laying down your selfishness, changing how you treat people, giving from the heart, not just from your wallet. The Pharisees are happy to give God the easy, cheap, external things, the small herbs that didn't really cost them anything, but they're unwilling to give him the hard, the expensive, the internal things, like treating people with justice and mercy and truly loving God with their whole hearts. Jesus is essentially saying, hey, you're very generous with the small stuff that costs you little, but you're stingy with the big stuff that actually matters to God. So we might call this cheap religion. It's the kind of a religion that gives God the leftovers, the easy, the external parts, while holding back the costly parts, especially the heart. Jesus isn't impressed. He wants their hearts, not just their herbs and spices. He wanted justice and mercy and love, not just external religious performance. Verse 43, woe to you, Pharisees, for you love the best seat in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces. First glance, might seem like this is a minor complaint, just wanting to sit in the front row or be greeted nicely in public. But that's not what's going on here. In the culture of that day, the best seats in the synagogue were positions of great honor. They were usually located at the front, facing the people, so everybody could see who was up there. And they were reserved for the most respected religious leaders. To sit in one of those seats was a public declaration or display of your importance or your authority. Likewise, being greeted respectfully in the marketplace with titles like rabbi or teacher or master was a sign of like a high social standing. Pharisees loved that kind of public stuff, that public recognition. They craved the honor and the respect that came with their positions. Here's what made it even more significant here, though. The Pharisees weren't just religious leaders, right? They were politically and socially powerful, especially in Jerusalem. While the Sadducees, they held the highest official positions in the government and the temple, the Pharisees had tremendous influence among the people. They were the religious elite in the eyes of the masses. Their opinions carried great weight, and they wielded significant social and religious power. So when the Pharisees fought for the best seats and the public greetings, it wasn't just about personal vanity. It was also about protecting and increasing their power and influence. The more honor they received, the more authority they held over the people. Their religion had become deeply entangled with the love of status and power. We know this, and Jesus sees right through this. He knows that behind their religious appearance was a heart that was hungry for human praise rather than praise from God. Their desire for honor revealed that their religion was not truly about serving God, it was about serving themselves. That's why Jesus pronounces a woe over them, a disaster. It's not just that they enjoyed the recognition, it's that their hearts were so consumed by the love of honor and power that they'd corrupted their entire spiritual life. Once again, Jesus is exposing the difference between external religion and internal reality. On the outside, they looked very spiritual and respectable, but on the inside, their hearts were driven by pride and desire for their own glory. Well, the third woe, verse 44, woe to you, for you are like unmarked graves, and people walk over them without knowing it. That's a pretty serious comparison here, actually. In the Jewish culture of Jesus' day, graves were considered ceremonially unclean. If someone came into contact with a grave, they would become spiritually defiled and would need to go through a cleansing process before they could properly worship God again, before they could be accepted back into the camp. Here's what made unmarked graves especially dangerous. If a grave was unmarked, It was hidden or not clearly visible. If nobody knew where it was, people could then accidentally walk right over it without even realizing what they had done. And they would become defiled without knowing it. It creates a pretty serious problem in their system of law. Because they didn't know they were defiled, they would naturally continue living as if everything was fine. They would keep going to the temple, they'd keep offering sacrifices, they'd keep approaching God, all the while being spiritually unclean and defiled. Because they didn't realize anything was wrong, they wouldn't seek any kind of change, any kind of cleansing, any kind of healing from their uncleanness. And Jesus looks at the Pharisees and says, hey, you're like those graves. You guys are like unmarked graves. You're spiritually dangerous. Just like walking over an unmarked grave would make someone unclean without them realizing it, the Pharisees' false religion and hypocritical lives were spiritually harming people in the same way. And those people didn't know it was happening. On the outside, the Pharisees looked very religious. They taught the law, they prayed in public, they followed strict traditions, and they appeared very spiritual. Many people looked up to them and followed their example. But on the inside, they're full of pride, greed, hypocrisy, corruption. And because they looked so good on the outside, people were being deceived and led away from God without even realizing the danger they're in. They'd continue going to the temple, they'd continue offering sacrifices and living their religious lives, all the while being spiritually defiled. And because they didn't realize anything was wrong, they'd not repent, they'd not seek healing, they'd not seek forgiveness. This is why Jesus uses this image. The danger is not just that people are being defiled, it's that they're completely unaware of it. They'll continue living and worshiping as if everything is fine, while actually remaining in a dangerous spiritual state before God. This is what Jesus says the Pharisees are doing to the people. Verse 45, one of the lawyers answered him, "Teacher, in saying these things, you insult us also." Up to this point, Jesus has been direct in his strong rebukes here, his woe statements at the Pharisees. He's already pronounced 3 woes against them, exposing their hypocrisy, their pride, the spiritual danger they were putting people in. Now someone else speaks up, one of the lawyers. This lawyer, these are the other word for these guys are scribes. This lawyer or scribe, he was an expert in Mosaic law. These guys were highly trained in interpreting and teaching God's word. They worked closely with the Pharisees and shared a lot of the same beliefs and practices. So when this lawyer hears Jesus rebuking the Pharisees, he immediately feels personally attacked is what's going on. Even though Jesus hasn't directly addressed the lawyers yet, this man realizes that, hey, many of the things that Jesus has been saying also apply to us. Jesus, when you criticize the Pharisees, you're also criticizing us, is what he's saying. You're including us in your rebuke, and hey, we don't like it. You can see the defensiveness, really, in his words. Instead of humbling himself and considering whether Jesus might be right, this lawyer becomes offended. He calls Jesus teacher a respectful title, but his heart is clearly resistant. It's a pretty revealing moment, actually. Shows us that when truth confronts hypocrisy, there's 2 ways to go with that. There's either repentance for the hypocrisy discovered, or defensiveness over the hypocrisy mentioned. Sadly, this lawyer seems to choose the second option. Instead of examining his own heart, he tried to push back against Jesus' words. Do you think this man knew deep down that he's just as guilty of the same things as the Pharisees? Do you think that that's why he felt personally attacked? Because he knows that there's a strong affinity, a partnership of sorts between scribes and Pharisees. They're cut from the same cloth, so to speak. And so any woe to a Pharisee was obviously felt by this lawyer as well. And Jesus is about to make this connection clear between the scribes or the lawyers and the Pharisees. Jesus has 3 statements of disaster for the Pharisees. Guess what he's got for the lawyers? Yeah, the exact same thing. 3 woes for the lawyers too. Verse 46, and he said, "Woe to you lawyers also, for you load people with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves do not touch the burdens with one of your fingers. The lawyers and the Pharisees, get this, were professional religious experts. Their entire life and livelihood revolved around studying, teaching, and keeping the law and the traditions of the elders. Because of this, they had significant advantage in law keeping that regular people just did not have. They had more time. They didn't have to work long hours in the fields or do hard manual labor. They had more resources. They had servants and money and easier access to water and even the ritual items for worship. They had more knowledge. They had spent years studying the law and traditions in detail. This meant that keeping all the extra traditions of the elders was much easier for them than it was for ordinary people. Their whole lives were dedicated to it. Regular people, farmers, fishermen, laborers, mothers, had to work long, hard hours just to survive and take care of their families. For them, trying to keep hundreds of extra man-made religious rules on top of everything else was extremely difficult, at least, if not impossible. Yet the lawyers and the Pharisees, they looked down on those people, and they burdened them even more with more rules, while they themselves had much easier time in keeping their rules. They created the rules, right? They created the system of the tradition of the elders. Why did they do that? To make themselves look better, to give themselves more authority and power. The religious leaders had created a system where they, the professionals, could easily follow their own rules, while regular people were crushed under the weight of those same rules. It's not a new problem. Ezekiel 34:4 says to the leaders of Israel in his day, 500 years before this, "You have not strengthened the weak or healed those who were sick or bound up the broken, you leaders of Israel. But with force and harshness you have ruled them." Isaiah 10 says, "Woe to those who decree unrighteous decrees, and that right misfortune which they have prescribed, to rob the needy of justice and to take what is right from the poor of my people." This is what Jesus says is still happening in his day. All these years later, the lawyers are still writing misfortune to the people. They still load men with burdens hard to bear, burdens they would never carry themselves. They were happy to make life difficult for everyone else while making sure their own lives stayed relatively easy. Deep selfishness, lack of compassion that this displays. They use their position of authority to oppress people rather than serve them. And for this, Jesus pronounces woe, or disaster. Verse 47, "Woe to you, for you build the tombs of the prophets whom your fathers killed. So you are witnesses, and you consent to the deeds of your fathers, for they killed them, and you build their tombs." It's one of the strongest rebukes yet. He looks at the lawyers and says, "Woe to you, for you build the tombs of the prophets, and your fathers killed them." First glance, it actually might seem respectful. After all, the lawyers were building beautiful tombs and monuments to honor the prophets. Jesus sees right through all this, though. In fact, you bear witness that you approve of the deeds of your father, for they indeed killed them, and you build their tombs. He's saying, your ancestors killed the prophets, and you're burying them. You're both on the same team. Kind of, you kill them, we'll put them in the ground idea. That's what Jesus is saying. They're a tag team. They hate the prophets just like their ancestors hated the prophets, is what Jesus is saying. The prophets had spoken hard truths to God's people. They had confronted sin. They had exposed hypocrisy. They'd called the people to repentance. And now this generation was showing that they felt the same way as their ancestors. They may not have killed the prophets of old themselves, but they're glad they're gone. That's why they're so eager to build their tombs, because deep down they're secretly thankful the voices of conviction have been silenced. And Jesus is warning them, this is the same hatred towards God's messengers that would soon lead them to do something even worse, because these are the people that are going to kill God's own son. Their hatred for God's messengers would just reach its fullest expression when they rejected and crucified Jesus himself. the greatest prophet and the very Son of God. This is why Jesus says they bear witness that they approve of their Father's deeds. Their actions prove that they had the same rebellious and murderous spirit as their ancestors. Jesus goes on, verse 49. Therefore also the wisdom of God said, I will send them prophets and apostles, some of whom they will kill and persecute. Therefore the wisdom of God also said. Jesus is saying here is this is not just my opinion. Jesus is saying. What he is about to say comes from God's divine wisdom and God's eternal plan. In other words, Jesus is revealing something here. God has always known that would happen to his messengers. Long before Jesus ever came to earth, God already knew that when he sent his prophets and apostles, many of them would be rejected, persecuted, and even killed. Yet in his great love and wisdom, he still chose to send them. God says, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they will kill and persecute. Just shows us the amazing heart of God. Even though he knew his servants would suffer and die, he still sent them because he loves his people. And he wanted to give them every chance to turn back. It's not a surprise to God. It's part of his sovereign plan. He knew the cost, and he's willing to pay it. He sent messenger after messenger, knowing that many would be rejected and killed because he is God who does not give up on his people easily or at all. And now in this generation, God has sent his greatest messenger of all, his own son, Jesus the Messiah, and that even now the people were continuing the same pattern of rejection that's going to lead to his crucifixion. Verse 50, so that the blood of all the prophets shed from the foundation of the world may be charged against this generation. Okay, it's not a light statement here. These are heavy words. When Jesus uses the phrase, this generation, note, he's not only speaking about the people who are alive during his earthly ministry. He's referring to the entirety of the Jewish people, past and present. Jesus is speaking of corporate national guilt. The whole nation throughout history shares the responsibility for rejecting and killing God's prophets. From the very beginning, the people of God had a long and tragic pattern of turning away from the messengers that God sent them. Now the full weight of this judgment would fall on this generation, the people who were alive during Jesus' time, for an important reason, because they're just as guilty as their ancestors. The same hard-heartedness that led their fathers to kill the prophets, this is not just about what their fathers had done in the past. It was about what they themselves were doing in the present. The same hard-heartedness that led their fathers to kill the prophets is going to lead them to kill Jesus. They're continuing in the same rebellion. They had the same resistant, unbelieving, hard-hearted attitude toward God. Because of this, Jesus says the same hard-heartedness would now lead them to do something more terrible. They'd kill God's own Son. The rejection of God's messengers would reach its fullest and most tragic expression when they crucified the Son of God. It's important to understand that they were not legally guilty for the sins of their fathers. The prophet Ezekiel makes clear in Ezekiel chapter 18, each person is responsible for their own sins. God doesn't punish children for the sins of their parents. So their guilt was their own. They're not being judged for what their ancestors had done, but because they were actively continuing in the same rebellion is why. They were rejecting God's final and greatest messenger, Jesus himself, just like their fathers have rejected the prophets before them. This is why Jesus connects his words back to Deuteronomy 32, actually, where God has already described his people in similar terms. Deuteronomy 32:5, they are a perverse and crooked generation. Verse Deuteronomy 32:20, I will hide my face from them, for they are a perverse generation, children in whom is no faith. Is Moses talking about only the people that were alive that day? No, he's talking about the people in general, and so is Jesus. Deuteronomy 32, God rebukes the nation of Israel for their rebellion, unbelief, and hard-heartedness. And by using the word generation here in Luke 11:50, Jesus is saying that people alive during his time were continuing the same perverse and rebellious pattern as Moses faced back when they were entering the promised land. Verse 51, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you, it will be required of this generation. Things are coming to a head, as Jesus is saying. Now he explains the full scope of the judgment that's coming upon this generation. He says, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the sanctuary. Pretty significant statement here. When Jesus mentioned these two names, he's not just pulling names out of his hat here. He's making a deliberate point. Abel, remember him? He's the first person ever murdered in the Bible. He was killed by his own brother Cain in Genesis chapter 4, right at the beginning of human history. This guy Zechariah, on the other hand, is not the same Zechariah that wrote the book in the Bible. It's a different Zechariah. This guy Zechariah, he was a priest who was murdered way later in Israel's history. His story is recorded in 2 Chronicles chapter 24. He boldly confronted the people for turning away from God, and because of his message, the people became angry, and they stoned him to death right there in the temple courtyard, between the altar and the sanctuary. So why did Jesus choose these names specifically? Well, in the Hebrew Bible, the first book of the Bible is actually Genesis, same as ours. But in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, our last book is Malachi. Theirs isn't. Guess what it is? 2 Chronicles. By saying from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, Jesus is just covering the entire history of the Old Testament. From the very first book to the last is what he's saying. From the beginning of the Old Testament all the way to the end, to the blood of every prophet who was ever killed throughout Israel's long history will be required now, is what Jesus is saying. When he mentions Zechariah, he's also drawing a parallel between Zechariah's generation and this generation that he's in front of right now, right? Just as Zechariah's generation killed God's prophet and then faced destruction and scattering, so this generation was about to kill God's son, and they're going to suffer the same fate. In Zechariah's day, after the people killed God's messenger, judgment came upon Jerusalem and the nation. Now, Jesus is warning that same judgment is about to fall again. The destruction of Jerusalem and the scattering of the people would soon come upon this generation as well. It's not just about guilt, it's about the coming judgment. The same pattern of rebellion that led to judgment in Zechariah's day was repeating itself, and the consequences would be just as severe. Zechariah was killed between the altar and the sanctuary, most sacred area of the temple. For someone to be murdered in that holy place was not only violent, it was a direct act of desecration against God himself. By mentioning this, Jesus was showing just how far the people had fallen. They were willing to kill a prophet of God in the very place where they were supposed to worship God. And again, now in this generation, they're about to kill God's son in the place where he should be coronated as king. Verse 52, one more. Woe to you, lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter yourselves, and you hindered those who were entering. For you have taken away the key of knowledge. This is the heart of his rebuke here. What does Jesus mean here? Well, God has already told his people, Hosea 4:6, my people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I reject you from being a priest to me. Isaiah 5. Therefore, my people go into exile for lack of knowledge. Both those passages show that when religious leaders fail to give people the true knowledge of God, it leads to spiritual destruction and judgment. Exactly what Jesus is warning about here. The lawyers had taken away the ability for God's people to truly understand him. The people desperately needed knowledge of God, not just knowledge of rules and traditions, but a real understanding of who God is and what he desires. And the key that unlocks that true knowledge of God is a heart devoted to God and his glory, a heart that seeks him, a heart that loves him and desires to honor him above all else. That's what God wants. That's what opens the gates of knowledge. And the lawyers had completely missed this. Through their religiosity and pride and selfishness, they had obscured or even hidden that key from God's people. Hosea 6:6 says, for I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings. Proverbs 21:3, to do what is right and just is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Jesus has told them many times, told them before, when they're complaining about Jesus' lack of rule keeping, he rebukes them. Matthew 9, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. And again, the lawyers and the Pharisees, looks like, have not heeded Jesus' advice at all. They haven't learned the heart of God. So instead of helping people understand the heart of God, they had persisted in turning knowing God into something external and complicated and self-serving and incredibly hard to do. They focused on rules and traditions and public appearances while their own hearts were far from God. In doing so, they made it nearly impossible for ordinary people to just truly know and love God from the heart. By their pride and selfishness, they had taken away the very thing the people needed most, the ability to truly understand and know their God. That's why Jesus is pronouncing such strong woes over them. They'd been given the sacred responsibility to lead people to God, but instead they had taken away the key that unblocks and unlocks the true knowledge of Him and how to get to Him. So Jesus makes two pretty serious statements that reveal the depth of the lawyer's failure here. He says, you did not enter yourselves, and you hindered those who were entering. Double accusation. First, Jesus says, you did not enter yourselves. The lawyers themselves had not entered the kingdom of God. Even though they were the religious experts who studied the law day and night, they did not truly know God or have a genuine relationship with Him. Their religion was external, legalistic, self-serving. They knew the rules, but they did not know the God behind the rules. They were experts in religion, but they were strangers to true relationship with God. And second, Jesus says, you're hindering those who were entering. Not only did they fail to truly know God themselves, but they were also actively preventing others from knowing Him. Through their false teaching, their man-made traditions, they made it nearly impossible for ordinary people to truly understand and love God. They were like gatekeepers who were supposed to help people enter the true knowledge of God, but instead they were blocking the door. Instead of leading people to God, they were standing in the way. Instead of opening the door to true knowledge of God, they had locked it and thrown away the key. This is why Jesus pronounces such strong words over them, such strong statements of disaster. They'd been given responsibility to guide people to God, but instead they were leading them away from Him, both by their own failure to know God and by actively hindering others from knowing Him. Jesus has been exposing a very dangerous kind of religion. The kind that looks very good on the outside, but is empty and broken on the inside. We have that danger today? Can we get in the same boat that these lawyers and Pharisees got in? Sure we can. The Pharisees and the lawyers were masters at external religion. They washed their hands, they tithed the smallest herbs, they built tombs for the prophets. But Jesus says their hearts are full of greed, pride, and wickedness. And worst of all, they'd taken away the key of knowledge. They'd made it nearly impossible for the people to truly know God and love God from the heart. They had turned a living relationship with God into a heavy, complicated system of rules and traditions. It's still alive today in some places. We'll pray that it's not here. Because good news this morning. Although the lawyers took the key away, Jesus knows where it is. In fact, Jesus is the key. He didn't come to give us more rules. He didn't come to add to the burden. He came to solve the problem that no one else could solve, the problem of the human heart. The deepest problems we face are not out there in the world. The deepest problem is in here, in our hearts. And no matter what's in your heart today, whether it's pride, anger, bitterness, shame, greed, lust, fear, pain, whether it's been there for years or it just got there, and Jesus can deal with it. No matter how it got there, no matter how long it's been there, no matter how deep it runs, Jesus is the answer. He's the only one who can reach into the darkest places of our hearts and bring healing and forgiveness and transformation. No other religion or religious figure can do that. He doesn't just clean the outside of the cup, he cleanses what's inside. He doesn't just give us a better behavior, he gives us a new heart. That's why he says, give me what is within. Give me your heart, and when you do, all things will be clean for you. All of you will be clean once I have your heart. External religion will never be enough. Rules and traditions and religious performance will never fix what's broken inside us. Only Jesus can do that. Have you given your heart to him? I hope so. Anybody watching this at home? I hope so. He doesn't want just your attendance. He doesn't just want your service. He doesn't want a reputation for you. He wants your heart. He wants the real you, the broken you, the hurting you, even the sinful you. Because no matter what's in your heart today, Jesus can deal with it. He's not afraid of what's inside you. He came for people just like us, people with messy hearts, wounded hearts, and sinful hearts, and he's still in the business of transforming hearts today, of cleansing us from the inside out. So let's not be like the Pharisees as we go out in this world. Let's not be like the Pharisees and lawyers who took away the key, who made religious display the thing to be emulated. Let's be people who hold out the key, who hold out Jesus, who point others to him. He's the only one that can solve this problem and set us all free.